my old friend Jerry Cohen. It's good to see you, Jerry. Thank you for doing this, by the way. Thank you for being with us. Where did you get your name? Who named you?
My mother.
Anybody else in the family have the name before? What is your full name?
Gerald Stephen Cohen.
And who was the Gerald and who was the Stephen?
I don't know if there was ever a Gerald or a Stephen. I think the names came from Hebrew names. They were somehow translated into Gerald and Stephen. What the Hebrew names were, I don't remember.
Okay.
But I do remember a picture of a great somebody sitting on a beach in Maine, and they said, that's who you were named after. But I have no idea who it was. I still have the picture.
Have you ever done a family history?
My brother started one. One of my brothers started one. When he died, it ended up with my other brother, who lives in Florida, who finally found it and is sending it to me so I can continue on with it.
Where did the family originate? Where was the Cohen family born?
Well, the Cohen family, my family, mother and father, were born in this country. My mother was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and my father, I believe, was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
My brothers and sister and I were all born in Winthrop, Massachusetts, which is, as a matter of fact, where Pete Demento came from.
Is that right?
Yeah. We always lived in Revere.
Did you have a nickname growing up?
Jerry.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get to when you moved and why you moved, but what's your present family situation? Where are you now?
I have a brother that lives in Florida who just retired from government service. I have a brother that died about 12 years ago of cancer.
Who's the brother living in Florida now?
Brother Roger.
And Roger, what government service was he?
He was in the State Department.
Uh-huh.
His last job, he was the third in charge of the embassy in Berlin. So he had a good job. My other brother, Wayne, was a character. The only way you could say it. If you remember the program Amos and Andy, and the attorney on Amos and Andy, Algonquin J. Calhoun, well, that's what my brother was like. Even growing up, he was like that. I have a sister who's still alive, who lives in Massachusetts. And
did your brother who passed away, was he an attorney?
Well, he graduated law school.
Oh, okay.
And every time he took a bar course, he would do perfect on it. But when he took the bar exam, he would answer the questions the way he wanted, not the way they were supposed to be answered. So he was like an attorney that practiced without a license.
Okay. And tell me about the kids.
My kids, my daughter's a phys ed teacher, and she teaches in Las Vegas. And my son is an entrepreneur, I would guess you would say.
What's your daughter's name?
Alexandra.
Okay.
And my son Joshua has a small partnership in about 5 bars in the city. He manages one, and because he likes to be on stage, he bartends 2 nights a week. And he's single. They're both single.
Now, who was the older?
Josh was the older.
Josh is the older.
He's 39 and she's 37.
Now, what of their abilities, of their special proclivities, talents? Do you see any connection with mom and dad there? Or?
Josh was a good athlete. Well, both of the children are athletes. She's a marathon runner, and he was a ball player all through high school and college. Which I think, other than my father, I'm the only one in the family that was an athlete. My other 2 brothers, if you threw a baseball at them, was liable to hit them in the head or the shoulder before they caught it. Right. He now is a walker. He lives down in Greenwich Village. And when he's not working, he's walking or he's at the gym. She's at the gym every day, and she does 2 or 3 marathons a year.
Wow. What was your paternal grandfather's line of work?
My paternal grandfather, it's a good question. I think he was a fruit peddler.
Mm-hmm.
his wife was the business person in the family. She owned a bakery in Roxbury, Mass. And she was the one that pretty much, I guess, ran things, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
If there was ever any questions, you went to her, not to him.
Okay.
Nice guy. He died fairly young. I think he died of cancer.
Mm.
She lived to an older age.
Mm-hmm. Did you know all your grandparents?
Yes.
Tell me about your maternal grandparents.
My maternal grandmother came from Warsaw and left just before the problems in the Warsaw Ghetto. Nice lady. My grandfather, who was a character, if I have to say so, he was a tanner. But he was also a roamer. And he could disappear and then be back, you know. He once decided he was going to go back to Europe to visit some friends. And I guess he was well into his 80s at this point. And he was a communist. And he was a known communist, which is very odd.
Well, this is during the 30s
yeah.
you're talking about. Okay.
But even as I was a kid, he was a communist. Because I remember my father, when I was about 5 or 6, said to me, just one thing I want to tell you, if your grandfather and your uncle are out delivering newspapers, you're not to go with them. Because they used to deliver the Daily Worker. He went back to Europe, and my father's advice to him was, do not go back to Poland, whatever. Well, when he was supposed to get back to Boston, he never showed up on the plane he was supposed to be on. Nobody knew where he was. And they finally got a card from him saying he was coming back, but he met an old friend somewhere in Poland. And the friend and he decided to go to Spain, because they both fought in the Spanish thing. It was a whole to-do about it. So he was really a character. Nice guy.
Yes.
But a character like you couldn't believe.
Yes. What was his occupation or his?
A tanner.
A tanner.
He worked in a tanning factory for years,
In the leather goods, I take it. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure he did other things, but I never knew what.
Right.
You know, and as he got older, every once in a while, my mother would say to me, go down the basement and break a window. So when Zeta comes over, he'll have something to do. And then she would call him and she'd say, Pa, I have a broken window in the basement. And he'd bring all his tools over and put a new window in. It was an interesting family.
Wonderful. So he was Polish, I take it then?
Well, the other side of the family was from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in Russia. We don't know where.
Okay, right.
But somewhere in Russia. And he and...
Those borders changed.
Yeah, they changed so much. You don't know where they were.
Right.
My brother and I did go back to Poland when he was stationed in, where was he? I forget. But he and I took a backpack trip through Eastern Europe. And we found the...
Must have been in the 60s then that you did that.
No, we went back about, I would say about 10 years ago.
Really?
He was in Hungary at the time.
Okay.
And my wife was still working. So when school started on a Wednesday, Thursday, I used to leave for Europe and visit him. And he and I would take off for a week or two. And we decided to go to Eastern Europe. And we found the exact plot that my grandmother lived in. And we were told by an uncle who was in his 90s that we should go visit a castle. Wouldn't tell us why. And we went to this gorgeous castle with all kinds of beautiful old paintings and everything in Poland. But we never knew why we went. And my brother finally contacted a cousin who said the reason you went there was because the uncle was the youngest of 9. And the women worked in the castle in the kitchen. They used to sneak him in at night to feed him. So he wanted us to see it. Wow. So it was really interesting. You know, when traveling through Eastern Europe was very interesting. Different.
I'll bet. Well,
yeah.
Now, you're talking about only 10 years ago, so you're talking in the 90s.
Yeah.
What's your earliest memory as a child?
Oh, boy. I do remember one thing with my paternal grandmother we used to go there for lunch or for dinner on Sundays. And she used to be into this chicken fat thing. And she would spread chicken fat on bread and give it to us. And I once said to my father, I don't like it. And he said to me, just take it and then go outside for a walk and throw it away so she doesn't see it. Things like that. I do remember as a kid, though, going to her bakery. My father used to help her out on Sundays. And across the street from the bakery was a movie theater. So on Sundays, they used to send me to the movie theater. I think it was like 10 cents to get in at the time. And they'd give me a quart of milk and a cheesecake to take to the theater so I wouldn't be hungry.
Well, your mother's maiden name would have been what?
Her Americanized name was Fisher. The name that we found was Fibashevitz. I know nothing else about it because I'm waiting for all the stuff to come.
Do you know when she came? When they first came?
No, I don't know exactly when they came. On the other side, the name was a different name. I forget what it was at the time. And when my grandfather came, his brother was already here, and he had taken the name Cohen. So that's how he got the name.
Okay.
But I don't remember what it was at the time.
Or what the port of entry was, or
They came in through Ellis Island.
They did.
Yeah.
Do you remember, Jerry, your mother enjoying certain things? What did she like to do?
My mother sewed. She was a great baker. Not really a good cook, but a great baker. Usually when she cooked things, they were a little brown on the bottom. So this was a family joke. We were going out to eat once. And we're all sitting around the table. She was older. She was about in her 80s at the time. And I ordered string beans on the side or something. When they came, I said to the waiter, you have to take these back. He said, why? I said, they're not brown on the bottom. And she threw something at me. But she cooked, she sewed. She was very involved in the Girl Scouts for years. She worked in one of the cancer hospitals, helping out. She also, at a time, worked at the airport, helping people that didn't speak English. She spoke Polish. Because I remember her and my grandmother having conversations. They didn't want us to know what they were talking about. She had originally wanted to be a nurse. And I know she studied, I think, in New York, but I'm not sure. But it never worked out.
What's the earliest memory that you can conjure up that involved your father?
Taking me out to throw a baseball.
Okay. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Did you have a large extended family, or was it a small?
No, we had a large family. I didn't know a lot of them. But we had an aunt and an uncle lived next door to us. There were a number of uncles and aunts that lived in the Boston area that we used to see because my father was friendly with them. And on my mother's side, we used to see one uncle all the time, two uncles all the time. There were others that I didn't really know, but I know that they were around, so that they did have family things.
Right.
I don't remember much about it because by the time I got to know them, most of them had passed away.
What did you learn from your brother?
From my brother?
Yeah.
Well, they're both younger than I am. In fact, my brothers and my sister are younger than I am. I don't know, I learned very much from them. The younger brother, I just learned to mind my own business. My brother that was the...
Did you get it? Do you see any evidence of having been able to teach them anything then?
Well, I had my middle brother in class.
Okay.
When I first started teaching, I was in a junior high, and he was in the 9th grade. And I had all him and his buddies in my classroom. And it was very interesting because I went to the principal and complained. And he said, don't complain. He said, I had my son and daughter in class. And that was the end of that discussion.
What about your sister? Did you teach her anything, or did you learn something from her?
I don't think so. I think my sister was pretty off on her own.
Yeah, okay.
She worked. She went to college, but she had a job all the time. She had married, had 3 children. And we were friendly.
Okay. Jerry, were there other, besides your immediate family, were there other adult influences that were important to you growing up?
I think one of them that was important was my baseball coach in high school, who was a guy you could talk to all the time. And then when I left high school and I went in the service, when I got out of the service, I think the dean at the college I ended up going to was an influence on me getting an education more than anything else. Not an influence on personal life.
Yes.
But an influence on getting an education and deciding on doing something.
That was my next question. At what point you might have decided that education is a field?
Well, I started college and then wasn't happy, so I went in the service. And when I went back to school, I was majoring in government. And I did take the exam to go into the government service and passed it. But I had to do something, and I was talked into doing student teaching by one of the teachers who I really liked. And I enjoyed it. I student taught in the junior high that I went to. And the principal was the principal when I went there. And there were teachers there that I had. And I remember walking in the first day of student teaching. My old math teacher wanted to know if I was the new custodian. And I said, I'm here to teach. And he said, you're kidding me. But it was interesting.
Do you remember the names of some of these teachers?
Well, I remember the math teacher was Mr. Gross, because he also had my father. And he said to me, you will never be as good in math as your father. But he spoke with an accent. He had a European accent. I do remember a couple of the teachers that I worked with that graduated high school maybe the year before I did. In the year I started teaching, I taught with about 6 guys that I went to school with. We had a great time. It was a very fun school at the time.
Jerry, you know how that feels because you remember the first time you ran into a student that was the son of somebody who had also been a student?
Well,
daughter.
I can give you one example. I was sitting in my office one day in the R.O.B.S building, and this girl walks in and says to me, I'm so-and-so. And my mother told me to come in and say hello to you. So I said, oh, good. I remember the mother very well. And how's your mother, blah, blah, blah. And she pulls this piece of paper out of her pocketbook and says, my mother said to give you this. And I says, what is it? And she said, to tell you that it's a pass you wrote her in 8th grade that she used all the way through high school because you never put a date or a time on it. And the kid said to me, can I have it? And I said, no. And it actually was a pass that I wrote out at South Junior High.
That's very funny.
Which was very funny.
Yes.
Her mother was going through old books and found it in a book.
Wow. If you look back, did you work in the family business? Were you in the bakery? Did you?
No, my father was an attorney.
Okay.
And I guess he probably wanted me to go to law school, but I wasn't interested in it at all.
What kind of law did he practice?
Civil law. And he was a town attorney for a while, but strictly civil law.
Okay.
Local.
What was your first paying job as a kid?
My first paying job. Well, if you understand I'll use the term mob in Massachusetts. It was very split. There was the Irish mob, the Italian mob, and the Jewish mob, but they all worked together. And I remember I wanted a job, and my father told me to go to see Mr. Fox. And it was on the beach in Revere. And I walked in, and this big guy said to me, what do you want here? I said, I have an appointment to see Mr. Fox. Oh, come on in. And Mr. Fox was sitting behind a desk. And I introduced myself, and I said, my father told me to come and see you about a summer job. And he said to this big guy, give him an apron with change. He'll give change out in the arcade. And that was my first real job.
Okay. What were some of the important family holidays that you celebrated?
Thanksgiving was the biggest. My mother always insisted everybody be there for Thanksgiving. Other holidays were kind of come as you can. But Thanksgiving was the time she insisted if you were within range, you had to be there.
And I take it you were very involved in sports when you were in school. So that was your after-school interest.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than hanging around the pool room.
Favorite subjects in school?
That's a good question. I think my favorite subject in school was history.
Hmm.
Back then you could take courses in ancient history, which I really enjoyed. And the teacher that gave it, I liked.
Yes.
So he made things interesting.
What about the least favorite subjects in school?
Probably art and music and math.
Did you then have a favorite season?
The favorite what?
Season of the year?
Spring.
And is that still true for you today? Okay.
Spring and summer,
Mm-hmm.
when I played ball.
And Jerry, I'm going to ask this because I've asked so many people. Is there an aroma that evokes a good memory for you? If you pick up an aroma floats through.
You're going to laugh, but it's sweat in the locker room.
Okay. No, I think I can understand that. That's visceral.
Yeah.
Really. Now, walk us through the schools you attended all the way through.
Well, I started off elementary school in the Liberty School. And from the Liberty School, went to the James A. Garfield Junior High School. And from there to Revere High School. Then I did a year at Boston College. And then went in the service. And when I came back, I went to Suffolk University.
By the way, when you say you went into the service, as I recall, you went into the Air
Navy.
Force.
Navy.
Oh, Navy. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I originally was in submarines. But the first time I went out on a submarine for more than a week, I hated it. And had to get out of it. And ended up eventually in the Seabees, which I loved. Went to BC for a year. And then when I came back, I started BC again, but didn't enjoy it. And I remember going in to see the dean and explaining to him that I was having a problem with everybody was too young. And his suggestion to me was to go over to Suffolk University, which had a lot of veterans going there. And he would call and make an appointment for me, which he did. And I went over the next day for an appointment and was accepted. And went there for the next 3 years. After Suffolk, I went to it's now the State University of Boston, but then it was called Boston State for a master's degree at night while I was working. And then in New York, I attended C.W. Post and Hofstra. I guess I did get another master's at Post, but I never filed for it. And went for certification in administration at Hofstra.
So what certifications do you
I have certification in guidance. Well, my basic certification is history
Yeah. Oh.
and phys ed. Then I went for guidance certification, and then went for certification as a school administrator.
Okay. Of all the stuff that you've done, and God knows you've done a lot of things over your entire career and are still doing. Is there something that you are particularly proud of?
Yes. I was asked a number of years ago by a student who had a child in 10th grade and raised the child herself while she was going through school. And she once said to me, if she ever got married, would I walk her down the aisle? At the time I said, yeah, sure, Well, I would say about 10 years later, I get a phone call and she says to me, do you want a tuxedo? I said, why? She said, well, I'm getting married and I'm going to hold you to your promise, which was very interesting. So I did. I walked her down the aisle and she got divorced. And then I walked her down the aisle a second time when she got married again, which is one of the things I really remember.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Great.
It was interesting too because she was Hispanic. And I remember sitting at the wedding. My wife said to me that we were out dancing, and someone said to her, "Is he her father?" And she said, "No, he was a counselor in school." And they said, "You're a kid."
Well, that certainly is something to be proud of. But I want to go to the other side, to the dark side here, and ask: was there a worse day of your professional life?
There were probably two. I don't want to mention names, but one was when I first became department head, Jim Very and I shared the job. I was in Ross and South and East, and he was in Sonderling and North and West. And I got a phone call from the then person who was in charge of guidance, first day of school, ordering me to go down to South Junior High to program special ed kids. And I said, can't do it. I said, I have about 20 parents here, but I'll be glad to go tomorrow. Do it now. And I said, I can't do it. Well, you're fired. And I said, well, you can't fire me. I said, you can take me out of this job, but I have tenure in what I'm doing. So you can't fire me for this. And then he put another person on the phone to listen to him fire me. Well, I remember getting a call about 15 minutes later from Mr. DiPietro saying, don't worry, you're not fired. And I said, okay, and went about my job. The next day I did go down and do the special ed kids. And the second occasion, again, was with the one of the then principals of the high school, who called me into his office just after he took over, screaming and swearing and going crazy about something. And I said to him, I am not going to stand here and listen to this the way you're talking. If you want to have a conversation with me, I'm more than happy to discuss it, but I will not put up with your vocabulary. And he swore again, and I got up and walked out of his office. He yelled, you're fired. It was the second time I was fired. And again, about 10 minutes later, I got a call from Mr. DiPietro saying, you're not fired, but I'd like you to meet with him tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. He's going to apologize. Which he did, and we got along to a degree after that point.
Great stories, Jerry. Great stories.
The other one, I'll give you a funny story, was with, and I will mention the name because I really liked the person, was with Gary Mintz. Gary Mintz used to have department head meetings that went on forever. And I would go to them, and if I wasn't involved by 3 o'clock, I would leave. And he called me into his office, and he said, you leave my meetings at 3 o'clock. Everybody else stays till 5. I said, but nothing you do involves me. And he said, well, if you can't stay, don't come. Well, for 2 years, I didn't go to a meeting. And I know that every meeting, Roy Rapp used to say, Mr. Cohen's not here. And I finally got a call one day from his secretary saying, Mr. Mintz would like you at the meeting Wednesday. And he says you'll be first on the agenda. And I said, I'll be there. And over the years, he and I talked all the time. We didn't ever fight.
Wonderful.
But it was one of the funniest things that happened because it just popped out of my head.
It's wonderful. What was the year that brought you to Brentwood the first time?
The first time was 1959.
Why?
And I was looking for a job getting out of college. And I saw that Brentwood was hiring. And came up and was interviewed by Mr. Yankowski, as a matter of fact. No, at that time I was interviewed by Mr. Weaver and offered me a job in the R.O.B.S building. And I came with 2 other guys who didn't take jobs. I said, I don't know anybody. I'm going back to Massachusetts.
High school was only built 2 years, 2 years prior to your arrival.
Yeah. And he offered me a job teaching history and coaching. And I decided not to take it. And I went back and taught in Massachusetts for 4 years. But then I decided it was time for me to leave. And I remembered Brentwood was always hiring, so I came back looking for a job again. Mm-hmm. And was interviewed by Mr. Yankowski in 1963. Mm-hmm. And was hired when West opened. And took a job at West. Of all things, teaching mathematics, which West really screwed up on. I was not certified in math. And they had me teaching 7th, 8th, and 9th grade honors, which was a disaster. My roommate, who was certified in math, who came up with me, was teaching history. And at night he did my work and I did his. And we used to go down every day to talk to Mr. Swenson that we had us teaching the wrong things. And he said, no, we don't make mistakes. So it was a funny year. It was a fun year.
If you hadn't gone into teaching, Jerry, what might have been a second choice of career?
I probably would have either stayed in the service, mm-hmm. gone back in, mm-hmm. or gone into the government service.
Okay.
Because those are the only other 2 things I really enjoyed.
All right. Did you, outside of up in the Boston, Massachusetts area, was there any other place that you looked for a job on Long Island? Or
No, well, I was offered a job in Smithtown.
Oh, okay.
I was offered a job somewhere else. I forget where, but Smithtown,
Do you remember any of the questions that you were asked by either Fred Weaver or Stan Yankowski?
Not very many.
Okay, all right.
You know, where did you graduate?
Yeah.
You know, have you had any experience? Can you coach something? They didn't ask many questions in those days.
Absolutely not. What was your impression of Brentwood when you arrived? Or of the school system, I should say. Of the school.
I really was coming from a very old traditional system in Massachusetts. It was different. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed this. All the schools I was in, I enjoyed. Didn't always enjoy some of the people there, but I enjoyed the schools and the kids. I really enjoyed the community. I mean, I got to know people in the community. I played softball in the Spanish League when I first came. I remember I had a convertible at the time, and people used to say to me, "How can you leave your top down all the time?" Well, the kids know me. They're not going to do anything. And I think when I got into guidance, I got to know more adults. And I ate in the community. I shopped in the community, even though I sometimes didn't live in the community. I hung out in the community. So people get to know who you were.
Who were some of the people you worked with the first
first year?
2 years, yeah.
Bruce Van Dyne, Charlie Gray, Ed Hardman. Let me think. Millie Singleton was there at the time. The principal was Jeff Dwyer, Bill Lapp.
Ed Frankie was there.
Ed Frankie wasn't in that
wasn't
West at that time. No.
Okay.
Trying to think of who else was there. I don't remember a lot of them.
Okay.
A lot of them were there for a year and left.
Yes. It was a high turnover.
Yes.
In those days.
I mean, if you had a degree and you were walking,
Yes.
you pretty much got hired.
You bet. Did you stick with the same grades when you were in the classroom, or did they?
I was only at West as a teacher 1 year.
Mm.
I had 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. It was mixed.
Mm-hmm.
Then I applied for a guidance job.
Okay.
It was hired the next year. In 1964, I was hired as a guidance person.
Okay. I wanted to ask you if your preparation, teacher college or ed courses, really prepared you for what you found when you came to Brentwood.
It gave you basic information,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I really learned what I was doing until I was actually in the classroom.
It was and probably remains an on-the-job training kind of
Absolutely.
experience
I agree.
until you do student teaching and
Yeah.
get your feet wet.
I remember the student teaching. I remember walking into the classroom with the teacher, and I knew the teacher. He
Ah.
graduated 2 years before me, and he said to me, "It's all yours," and he walked out.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it.
Jerry, although there was always a job description that followed you, as a matter of fact, it follows you to today because you're still involved, and you'll talk about that. But as far as the job description is concerned, that was there and it was clear on paper. But you had your own purpose for coming in every day and for doing what you did and for doing what you do. Has that purpose morphed over the years, or does it still
No, it's still there.
remain the same?
It still remains the same, though mainly now with a different type of student. I guess when I first started, it was every kid was the same. Treat them the same. But most of the kids were normal. I mean, they had problems, but they were normal, everyday kids. It's different now. I'm there at night, and I'm dealing with more dropouts, gang kids. Some of them getting out of prison, coming back to school. And I really try to treat them the same as I did the kids way back.
Yes.
Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
What was and it remains your purpose with those kids?
Is to get them through school and try to get them on to do something with their life.
Mhm. You've
have
probably
a
seen.
purpose. I mean,
I was going to say you've probably seen many, many successes as
Oh, yeah.
you've gone along,
and some
and
failures.
some failures.
Yeah.
Sure. What exactly are you doing now? Tell us what.
Well, what I'm doing now is I go into night school, and I'm scheduled to go in one night a week. But if they need me more, I'll go in more. And what I do basically is take care of records, check over all the graduation stuff at night. There's 4 counselors work at night, one each night, Monday through Friday. Work with them. Some of them are new. If it's funny, if someone comes in with a record they can't translate, I get it. And the only really things I can't do are Asian. I have a book I got about 30 years ago. I don't think anybody else has. That translates school systems you can't believe into English and shows you what one grade is there compared to a grade here. And I can still use it. And I sometimes even get calls from old cronies from other districts to help them out with it. I tell them to get the book. And they say, we can't get it. No one has it. It's interesting at night. I enjoy it. I enjoy the kids that come in. They come in. They know if they come in, do their work, don't make a problem, they're going to pass their courses and eventually get a diploma.
There was a time when we began, I say we because I came in at 63 when you came in too, that Brentwood, the demographics of the community were certainly diverse,
Mm-hmm.
but nowhere near the diversity that exists today. Today, it is probably more. People used to say, "Oh, it's a microcosm of the country," but today it's a microcosm of the world.
Yes.
And that has profoundly affected the nature of what you do.
Yeah. There's numerous languages spoken, numerous cultures that are there. It's interesting.
Do you have connections with former colleagues and former students? Do you?
Former students all the time. I have a twice a year luncheon with 4 women that graduated in 1970. I have a weekly correspondence with a girl who's in Ohio that graduated in 1970. We've been talking by phone. Now we talk by internet. I recently had lunch with 2 women I haven't seen in 35 years. We found each other on Facebook. I see a lot of the old grads at the gym. I play ball with some of them. It's fun. A lot of them are still teaching in Brentwood. So you see them.
Sure. Did you ever have time to be involved with the professional organization?
I was in BTA, and 1 year I was on the negotiating team with Tom Brush, Barry Finkelstein, Matty Dwyer. I remember that Harold.
Sabatko?
No, not Sabatko. He was Harold. He was the treasurer for the BTA. I can't think of his last name.
Starts with an S.
I may think of it. I remember we used to once in a while want to go to lunch, and for the 4 of us, he'd give us $5 and tell us not to spend too much.
And so, what were some of the things that? Oh, you were on the negotiating.
Yeah,
okay.
I was a representative for a couple of years.
Yes.
But
Okay.
the only thing I really got involved in was in that 1 year for negotiating.
What about with BIPSA? Did you ever have any connection with?
I was a representative 1 year, but never really got involved. I would go to meetings and listen,
Yes.
and offer my vote. But
Yes. Were you ever scared?
in school,
Yeah.
I think I was afraid the year that the guy went to East with the gun. Even though I wasn't that East, I got called to go over there. And I think that bothered me a lot. Not more scared for myself, but really scared for the people in the building.
What makes you laugh, Jerry Cohen?
Oh, a lot of things. One of the biggest things that makes me laugh is a young man that comes in at night to see me as a former gang member. And he was thrown out of school, not allowed on school grounds, tattoos neck to toes. If he wanted to see me, he had to go to security and tell me he was coming. They would call me. And knowing that I'm a Red Sox fan, he would come in dressed from head to toe in Yankee stuff. And I would say, "Why are you wearing that?" They'd say, "Just to break your chops." And he would come in about every couple of months to see me. And he finally came in one day and he's wearing a turtleneck. And I said, what's the difference? We always saw his Yankee stuff. And he had a job. And he told me that he was never going to wear an open collar shirt again because he decided it was time to really move on. He got a job in a Walmart and was promoted to assistant manager. So he said, from now on, it was long sleeve shirts. I said, "Man, I can't believe it that you're finally doing something like this." And he got his high school, but he did come back and get his diploma. But I always thought he would just be a gang member and,
Yes.
go on with it.
The things that occasionally make you angry, what would that be?
In school?
Yeah.
When you spend a lot of time with a kid and you really set them up so they can graduate, and not that they fail something, it's that they stop going for no reason. Not that they got pregnant and not that they got put in jail. They just stop.
Yes.
And it upsets me.
Yes.
And no matter what you say, it doesn't do any good.
Of all the people that, on that matter, I think it comes late to us, but there's a realization at some point along the line that you can't save everyone.
No.
You can't help everyone.
You can't.
You have to take your losses along the way.
Absolutely.
I was going to say the person or people who were most helpful to you during the course of your tenure. And there's a lot of them, Jerry. And
I
know
would
that
say,
it's-
going along the line, Steve Howland,
Mhm.
when he was principal at East, was very helpful to me. And on days when I wasn't doing well, I could call him and go to East and sit and talk with him. Stan Yankowski, of course, was always helpful. Even though people considered him a strange person, I would say in all the years that we taught, Tom Dwyer and I had a conversation every day, where one of us asked the other a question about something. And we still do now.
Do you? Good.
Not every day, but at least once a week.
Is Tom still working in
At night school,
at
yeah.
night school?
Tom's been there a year longer than me. He started night school in 1963, and I started in 1964. Dave March was very helpful also. Once you got to know Dave, you could sit and have a conversation with him.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting how the flavor of the system evolved as the leadership changed over the years, which continues to this day.
Yes.
The date of your retirement, what was that?
I'm guessing it was 12 years ago.
It must be difficult because you retired, but then you came back in another capacity, and you really haven't retired in one sense.
No, but I came back in a capacity that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
The capacity I retired from, I enjoyed really up until the time I retired. I just, at that point, had enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so 12 years ago would be, let's see, we're 2009, so 2000 and 2007, about there.
So about 12 years ago, 2009 would be 1990.
No, 1997. 1997.
About that.
Okay. Last building assignment while you were active in the day?
Department head. My office was in the R.O.B.S building.
Mm-hmm.
It was K through 12 department head at the time.
Total years in public education up to that point?
40, well, not counting up till now, but up till retirement,
Yeah,
I had 37 years.
37. And still going, Jerry. And still going. What were some of your second jobs? Because I'm sure at some point in the beginning you did something
I
else.
bartended.
Uh-huh.
I drove a truck for a construction company. Actually, one of the better second jobs I had, I worked for the water company. Summers. One of the students I had, his father was the timekeeper for the water company. I was complaining once I needed a job. And I'd go see my father. And ended up working with the water company.
Was this Brentwood Water Company?
No, Suffolk County.
Suffolk County Water.
I ended up working with 4 guys I was in the Navy with. And it was really a good job. And years later, I bumped into someone and told them I worked part-time for the water company. They said they never hired anybody part-time. I said, well, they did me. It was a great job.
Do you remember what you made your first year salary?
My first year's salary, I was offered a salary of $3,200 in Massachusetts. And one of the board members said, no, give him 36 and he'll coach 2 sports. And I said, deal. When I came to Brentwood, I was making $5,000 in Massachusetts, and Brentwood offered me $7,900, which I said, hey, I can move for that.
Good money. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. The reason that you decided that it was time to retire back then in '97 was what?
I was just looking out the window in my office and thinking about all the things that were going on, and just said, it's time for somebody new to do this. I just...
Get tired.
Yeah.
Because you always loved what you did.
Yep.
It wasn't, you didn't...
I just felt it was time for a younger person to get involved and start doing some of this stuff.
What was the most fun for you in job related?
Sitting with kids and talking about things that were fun. Not necessarily, and they could have been school related. I remember one used to come in all the time. She still works in the district. I won't mention her name. And at the time, she hated her math teacher. And she used to always come in and say, can I sit for 10 minutes before I go to class? And we would talk about something till she felt better. And then I'd give her a pass to go off to class. Or kids coming in and just wanting to talk. I always thought was the fun part of the job.
One of the nice things I remember about counselors that you worked with at some point probably was Chris Thorpe would always have a group in the morning before the day started, a round table where they just sit and talk, have coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Frankel always had
Yep.
people coming to talk with him, and you guys provided that. That was.
I remember I had a group once that Gary Mintz called me and wanted me to start a sex group with special ed girls. And I said, get a woman to do this. He said, well, no, 2 of the parents requested you. So I had these 5 girls used to come in. They used to go to BOCES, then come in. And we would talk about not going to boys' houses after school if there was no parent home. We would talk about being careful out in the street, things of that nature. And when they would come in for a meeting, I remember the secretary used to announce them and say, your sex group is here. Out of the 5, 3 got pregnant. And when I asked one why she didn't, she said, I don't have a boyfriend. I went to Gary and said, please don't ever do that to me again. But it was a fun, they were nice kids. And I don't know that they even understood a lot of what we were trying to talk about. But things like that, and you had groups that wanted to come in and just talk. 3 or 4 girls having boyfriend troubles. Why they didn't go to a woman, I don't know.
You must have gotten a lot of discussion, put it that way, during the years of the alternative school, when there was an alternative in Brentwood,
Mm-hmm.
and because those discussions that you talk about, that was part of the routine, and you got really, as I'm sure you did, really close to kids and families as well.
Quite a few. There are still families that I talk to that the kids are now in their 50s and a couple of the parents are still alive.
First generation that's ever happened to with parents of that. Did you have heroes growing up?
I think Ted Williams was one of my heroes. Probably
If
a couple of ball players.
Okay. If it were possible, this is unfair, Jerry, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If it were possible to do things, something differently than you had done it, or make a decision other than you made at some point along the way that might have changed things for you, is there something that you would have
done? I think you're going to laugh, but I think I might have been more administrative friendly. Even though I was friendly with a lot of the administrators, there were others I just sometimes couldn't hold back. Maybe it said some things I probably shouldn't have said. I may have handled a couple of student things differently. I remember a couple in particular that just didn't turn out well. But no, I think I pretty much went along and was pretty much satisfied with the way things went.
Think back to what we've seen and during the time that we have spent in this life. I guess I can speak for you when I say we were probably born during the same period, during the Roosevelt years, let's say. The country wasn't even electrified yet to a great measure. There were no system of highways. The Long Island Expressway hadn't been built or completed. Northern State was still being constructed. And now we're so wired and so connected. It has changed the pace to a great measure. It has speeded things up, and we're getting kids, as you've said, from all over the world with different cultures, sometimes not even having a culture of their own.
It's true. It's very interesting.
And a lot of history has occurred. Talking about your love of history, but we remember where we were when the Challenger occurred. We remember when the towers came down, the assassinations during the 60s, all of that. We've talked about a lot of things, Jerry, but I'm not sure that we've covered everything that we wanted to talk about. What is there that we've left out?
I don't know. I think maybe how some of the kids that we've had worked out, that we've all had. And what people used to think that, I remember back one year being in a bar up in Huntington, way back when I was single, and talking to a couple of ladies at the bar, and I worked in Brentwood. They said, "Oh my God, we're not allowed to drive through Brentwood if we want to go to the South Shore. We have to go either to 110 or to 112." And I said, "Why?" I could never understand that. And they could never understand, why would you want to teach in a district like that when there's so many other districts around you could go to? And I was always very happy there. I thought it was a really great place to be in. When the community people got to know you, it was a great place to go because the people knew you. They said hello.
It's true that there was an extended family of sorts.
Absolutely. It's like, I remember, just on a quick note, I came into school one year complaining that the hubcaps on my car were stolen. And I was crying and moaning and everything else. And I came in the next day, and Joe Manchester, who was the custodian, says to me, "There's a box for you in the corner." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Go look. There's a box full of hubcaps and the sign says, 'Take 4.'" Not knowing what to do, I did take 4 and put a sign on my door that just said, "Thanks." No one ever said they left them. The next day, the box was gone. And I always said, I was always hoping that somebody bought them and left them there, but I know that they were probably found by the side of the road. But this is the way they were.
Yes.
I remember getting invited to families for dinner. My first year there, I got invited to a family for dinner, and after dinner, the man said to me, "We're going to the fights." I thought we were going to cockfights on Stein Drive, and I said, "Holy mackerel, I've never been to one of those before in my life." But people always did things like that way back. It was a great community. I just think it still is. It's different. And I'm sure it has different problems now than it had then.
Yes.
But if I was starting over, I would still want to teach in a place like that.
What about your advice to somebody coming in to the first year as a counselor? What would you advise them?
Boy, is to really learn who your kids are. I think one of the problems they have now is there are so many restrictive rules set by the state. I mean, years ago, if a kid came crying, you could put your arm around and sit down and say, "Don't cry." You could never do that now. You couldn't walk down the hall with a kid now without someone saying something. Excuse me. You know, you could close your door and talk to a kid behind a closed door. You can't do that now. I mean, it's just so different. I think the counselors now just have to take their time, learn who the kids are, become educationally involved with them, not be afraid to call a parent, even though the parent may not be there. If you have something to say, call the parent and talk to them about it. Don't just slough the kid off and say, well, that's, nothing we can do about that.
But basically what you're saying is get to know your kids.
Get to know your kids. Get to know your kids. If you can know the family, get to know the family. I always thought that was really important.
Yes. If you could wave a magic wand and change something system-wide, what would you think would be important enough to change? Of all the things that you might say.
Looking over everybody's shoulder that they're doing now. I get the feeling that people are afraid to do things because Big Brother's watching.
You mean
even things that are legit? That they're afraid that the next person over them is watching them to see if they're doing something wrong, or they're not following a rule to the nth percentage. I think it would go back to the time when you could go in and have a discussion with your supervisor that would lead to something, not him to say to you, "That's the rule. That's what we got to do." Get them involved in maybe a problem you're having, which they don't want to get involved in. Now I see. It's different. I think it's a lot tougher now than it was.
Complete the phrase, Brentwood teachers are.
I think are, for the most part, really involved in what they're doing as much as they can be. They want to be involved, sometimes more than they can be. They're interested in the community for the most part. They're interested in the kids they work with. And I think that's the big part of teaching.
And what about completing this, Jerry, as best you can? Brentwood students are.
A very diverse group, if I have to say anything. I think for the most part, they're kids that want to get an education, they want to graduate, and want to do something with their lives, even though you know that there's gangs and everything, and that's a percentage that don't want. But for the most part, I think that's what they want to do.
Jerry, I think it's time for us to say thank you for being with us. Thank you so
pleasure.
Much. It's been, for me, a joy.
It's interesting to get back and say things.